I'm Peter Klein. I'm the Executive Director for the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority. And for today, I appreciate everybody coming and getting together this afternoon. We're going to be talking about our request for information and answering questions. There are over 100 participants expected today, so we may not get to all of the answers during this hour. But to the extent we don't, we are going to be keeping track of questions and responding to them at a later time, and they will become part of this webinar's archive. I'll be going through my slide deck, and it's probably about a 10, maybe 15-minute presentation. I'm not going to be following the chat, although other people will be following the chat. Don't intend to be taking any questions during the slide presentation. However, after the slide presentation, either ask questions in the chat or raise your hand, and then you'll be allowed to enter and ask the questions at that point. Let's see, I'm joined today by Commerce staff, Pete Wyckoff, Lisa Paulich, and our consultant, Brendan Slaughterback. Those are the three individuals that have done the lion's share of standing MnCEPA, and they're backing me up today as I make this presentation. So excuse me, let me get a drink of water, and then we'll get going on my slide presentation. All right, this is the slide presentation for our request for information that was published on February 7th. So I'm trying to, there we go. So today we're going to do an introduction and overview of Minnesota's goals, and then cover MnCEPA. Then we're just an overview of what MnCEPA is required to do in the statutes and what we intend to be doing. And then talk about the Department of Energy's loan program office opportunity with a state energy financing institution, which MnCEPA is one. Then the RFI overview, and after that, we'll open it up for questions. So Minnesota's goals. We have some great climate goals. That last legislative session is requiring Minnesota to have our electric production to be 100% carbon free by 2040. Got a lot of work to do, but we're going to get there. Beyond that, our energy consumption and production should be carbon free by 2050. Both huge goals, nationally recognized, and MnCEPA is going to be a key player in helping Minnesota reach those goals. Let's see, the other goals are that utilities are required to reduce the annual energy consumption of their customers by 2.5% on an annual basis. To do that, they're going to have to be investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects all over the state. Also, the Natural Gas Innovation Act, so reducing natural gas as a fossil fuel, reducing its use. And then distributed solar generation standards, so increasing the amount of solar throughout the state and having more solar generation in the grid. Not going to go through all of these, obviously, but there was a lot of activity in the 2023 Minnesota legislative session. And just lots of national recognition for Minnesota being on the forefront of really tackling emissions and climate change. So the overview of MnCEPA. So the statute did allocate $45 million to MnSEFA. And we have those funds on hand right now. And our objective is to accelerate the deployment of clean energy projects. We are an independent agency, although Commerce is really doing the lion's share of the work up until now and continues to. And we have to have a focus of disadvantaged, low income and climate justice communities and tribal communities. So that is an overarching guide that we have in everything that we're going to be doing. So the investment, we are required to have at least 40% of the direct benefits of the authority needs to flow through to environmental justice communities. Another part of our statute does say that any project over $100,000 will need to pay and report prevailing wages for the part of the project that is being financed through the MnSEFA. So we are required to establish a strategic plan this year and also an investment strategy. Our board is in place as of late last year. We've had one meeting in January. Our next meeting is March 20th. And those two documents, our strategic plan and investment strategy, are going to be key components of our board activity for the next several months. We will be contracting with organizations to help facilitate those discussions, and we're going to be sure to be taking in comments from anybody that would like to comment on our activities. The other part of our statute does say that we have to collaborate with the Department of Energy Loan Program Office and the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Those are absolutely what we want to be participating in. They're a key factor in what we're moving forward with on this request for information. To develop these plans, got a wide range of stakeholders, and the various lists that we have, but we're absolutely open to having anybody join in this discussion. And our website, MnSEFA, it's really part of the Department of Energy's website right now, or Department of Commerce's website right now. But if you get just Google MnSEFA, you can sign up for any of our information that we are distributing, any information that we are distributing. So I want to talk about the Department of Energy's CEFI opportunity. There, talk about Jigar Shah being the $400 billion man, and in the upper right, he came to St. Paul last fall and met with him and others, Russ Stark and Mayor Carter, and some of you will recognize Michael Noble there as the fourth person on the upper right side. So they are going out nationally, the Department of Energy and Jigar Shah, trying to get states to recognize the opportunity that we now have with the Department of Energy and to try to utilize those funds as much as possible. We have at least bi-weekly meetings with the Department of Energy. So the 400 billion is broken down here, and what we're really focused on is the $80 billion. It used to be that you had to have really cutting edge, bleeding edge projects that only maybe had one or none never being implemented before. What has changed with the Inflation Reduction Act is that we are now able to finance projects that aren't as innovative and as that needed to be in the past. And the requirement, though, is that a state CEFI, such as MnCEFA, needs to have an investment in the project. But with that investment, this innovative requirement is waived. The tribal energy loan guarantee is also something that I think that will probably be helping the tribal communities work with as they roll out their programs. And they're going to probably be in conjunction with ours. Lots of states are working with the Loan Program Office, New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania, California, but we're right in the front. We're right up there. Nobody has submitted an actual application yet. We intend to be one of the very first to be submitting applications to the Department of Energy. This slide just shows quite a few examples of concept projects that Department of Energy is looking for proposals from. And so virtual power plants, affordable housing, district energy systems, fleet electrification, industrial decarb, community energy projects, government building decarbonization, including schools, and commercial building decarbonization. So it's a wide variety of projects that they're expecting to be receiving applications for. Well, and people wonder why we love living in Minnesota. Oberg Lake, I love it. Not sure who, oh, I think Brendan picked that slide. All right, so MnCEFA. So the RFI is really there to inform us on potential projects and programs that are out there. These two pots or areas are not mutually exclusive. We could be talking about proposals of projects or programs that aren't in that $100 million range that the Department of Energy Loan Program Office needs to get to. But we may be able to aggregate projects, smaller projects, to a level that we could get to the level that we can use the Department of Energy Loan Program Office funds for. So these are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, we fully believe that many smaller projects and programs will be able to be aggregated and bring us to a level for that will allow us to apply for Department of Energy funds. So we are looking at ourselves as a gap financer, trying to fill in the gaps that the private sector is not able to become comfortable with to finance, or perhaps the rate of return that the private sector is looking for just makes the project not economically viable. And so we're looking to fill gaps to get more projects accomplished and to help private developers and private financiers accomplish those projects. This is just a list of some of the areas that we see the biggest gaps in and would like to be helpful in helping those projects move forward. So this is the breakdown between CEFI and just Minnesota, our Minnesota funds in the Green Bank. So to really access Loan Program Office, Department of Energy funds, it needs to be at least $100 million. Their average, they tell us, is about $500 million. So we need to aggregate smaller projects or have large projects in order to access these funds. They will fund or guarantee up to 80% of the cost of those projects, which requires a 20% local support. It also requires that the CEFI and CEFA would have to have actual funding from it in these financings. But it doesn't need to be the full 20%. So $100 million project, perhaps Department of Energy comes in at 80 million, perhaps MnCEFA can come in at $5 million, perhaps less. And then we work with philanthropic and private sector and equity investors to fill in the rest of the gap. This is not free money. It's not grant money. This is a loan. And the interest rate is based on the Treasury rate of a similar term. So if we are looking for a 10-year loan, it's going to look to the Treasury bill rate at the time of the closing of the loan. And then they're going to add 0.375% onto that interest rate. There's probably going to be some additional interest rate basis point increases as well. But in general, we're hoping to be able to bring financing in at a rate under 5%. And these are fixed rates for a fairly long period of time. This slide says for up to 30 years, they're not likely to be providing too many 30-year financings, but 20 years, we can certainly get there. And 10 to 20 years with an interest rate under 5%, I think is a pretty attractive rate in this market right now. So MnCEFA, with our $45 million, we are not able to fund a project directly for under $250,000. So we are not going to be the retail lender for most small projects. For a 40 kW, $100,000 project, we're not going to be the financer of that directly. But we can finance programs that will be the financer of that. So we could fund $1 million to a program generated by one of you. We could fund $1 million, and then you would be the direct lender to the ultimate developer of that project or property owner. We are looking at loans as well, just as the Department of Energy is. We're not really seeking to provide grants at this point. And we're seeking information on the terms and interest rate that might be needed. The MnCEFA Board of Directors will be reviewing that. That's part of our investment strategy, is really tackling what kind of terms and interest rates that we will be seeking. At this point, without board input, hoping to keep things in under that 5% interest rate, have it a little bit better than market, and help with the expectation that that's going to help some more projects get accomplished. Okay, the details of the RFI are just at the Commerce website under the Request for Proposal tab. These submissions are due by March 15th. My intent is to accumulate those submissions that we have, and then really present those to the MnCEFA board at our March 20th meeting. As far as questions, I'm sure some of you have been putting things in the chat, and others will be helping me collect those questions. As this is the last slide, you can raise your hands and I'll answer questions for the rest of the hour to the extent that we can. It really does need to end at the top of the hour. Well, that gives us 35 plus minutes to answer as many questions as you want. And so I'll hopefully get rid of that slide and open it up for questioning. And just raise your hand if you want to have that question, if you want to just converse with us. Otherwise, Melissa will help me and Pete will help me with questions that are in the chat.
Yeah, and Pete Klein, so let's get started with some of those. We have an initial one that reads, am I understanding correctly that you plan to aggregate smaller loans to obtain DOE loans? Right now, DOE diligence is pretty intense and can last 12 to 18 months, harder than some private financing. Is that level of diligence also expected for the smaller MNCEFA loans?
Well, we are going to have underwriting guidelines that we're going to follow, but those need to be established by the board of directors. Until that establishment of the underwriting guidelines, we are able to deploy a certain amount of funds. About 25% of our funds are eligible to be deployed. But we will have underwriting guidelines. I anticipate monthly board meetings for approval of financing projects. And as far as a 12 to 18 month process, I don't believe that we're going to be in that that long of a period with the Department of Energy, and we are certainly not going to be in that kind of leg with MNCEFA funds. We intend to start getting MNCEFA funds out as soon as possible.
Can I jump in, Pete Klein? This is
Please.
This is Pete Wyckoff, Assistant Commissioner in the Department of Commerce. Hi, Ann Clausen. Good to see you. I haven't talked to you, I think since I was in DC. So just to follow up, we are in weekly, at least every other 2 weeks meetings with DOE and their CEFI program. Yes, there is a lot of diligence on DOE LPO loans, but they are committed to try to make these things work for state CEFIs. So I think we are optimistic that we can find a way to access these funds.
Okay, next one. Would funding for electric school buses for Minnesota school districts qualify for a loan?
The answer is yes. So decarbonization of fleets is absolutely one of our target areas, and we feel that that would be eligible. So it could be that MNCEFA is the financer, or we're partnering with philanthropic or private banks, private investors, or if we have enough volume of the electrification of fleets, then maybe that is some application that we send to the Department of Energy. Another point that I'd like to make on the Department of Energy Loan Program Office is that what we're seeing is we might only get to a dozen projects that maybe are $20 million that have similarities. We've talked with other states, and we are confident that we could combine an application with other states. And so if we have $20 million of bus electrification, we can work with other states that maybe have $20 million and get to that $100 million application minimum that the loan program office is looking for.
I'll add to that. We are explicitly in our statute allowed to collaborate with other states on DOE and other projects, provided that the amount of MNCEFA money is proportionate to the benefits that come to the state of Minnesota. So, as long as we are getting our fair share out of the project, we are explicitly allowed to collaborate with other states.
And I really think that we've got, I don't see how it wouldn't would not work out that way. I mean, it really is where participating with other states and that proportional benefit from the loan program office should be derived by us.
Okay, next up, and before I read this, let me say you're also allowed to just raise your hand and then I can try to get you to unmute so we don't have to listen to me reading your question. So feel
Yeah.
free to do that. Okay, the next one is, apologies if this isn't exactly RFI related, though I would say maybe it is. You mentioned that school districts are eligible to apply for funds. Just to confirm, are other local units of governments, such as cities and counties, eligible as well?
We are absolutely focused on school districts and public buildings and decarbonizing all of those. So cities and counties and school districts and any other state buildings, any publicly owned facilities are eligible. As I'm envisioning this rolling out, I can definitely see combining sectors and maybe it is just all public sector, but maybe we are just able to just focus on the schools and trying to maximize the solar impact that they are able to provide to reduce their carbon emissions.
Okay, we're gonna do Kevin.
I want to
Yes.
just make sure I've got absolutely every unit of government has the ability to apply with us.
Perfect. Okay, let's do Kevin McDonald and then we'll come to Anne, and I see there are others there. So hold on for just a second. So what is the working definition of greenhouse gas emission projects and how does this differ from clean energy projects?
I think I've been talking a lot. Brendan, do you want to step in or?
Well, I think, both the Minnesota statute that enabled MnCEFA as well as things like the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which we're seeking funds from, the eligible projects, one of the criteria that they have to meet is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So the Minnesota statute has some additional criteria that define eligible projects, and we can put that in the chat. But I think clean energy would be a subset of the types of projects that would be able to qualify as greenhouse gas emissions reducing projects. So not meant to be exclusively clean energy, but those are certainly going to be likely a major component of the activities of MnCEFA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, you should be able to come off mute and share your question.
Great, thanks so much. Appreciate everyone taking the time today. Could you touch a little bit on what would be most helpful for you to receive in terms of comments? Because it sounds like you're really focused on loans. And so then it seems like the questions aren't so much what should you fund, but really what are the terms that would be most useful? And I want to make sure I'm understanding that right, but also really want to make sure that you're getting the type of feedback that's helpful for you and the board. So like any open questions you have of like, should we do this? Should we do that? I think would be really useful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I think for this RFI, we're really looking for program ideas and project ideas. And as we enter into our development of our strategic plan and financing strategy, then we're going to be looking for more input on the interest rate and the terms that are going to be required. But for this RFI, we would like to see as much specificity as you can provide relating to the project or program that you're proposing. So it could be solar project on a specific area. It could be a solar garden. It could be a lending program that's going to lend for air source heat pump investments in single family housing or multifamily housing. Could be all kinds of areas, but that's what we're trying to do, is run this simultaneous path of developing a list of potential projects, finding out what kind of funding we are going to receive from the EPA grants, and then trying to accumulate that list of projects and see if we can accumulate projects of similar nature to allow us to go to the loan program office.
Can I add to that, Pete Klein?
Please.
So I think this is the first sort of please communicate information about what you would like from MNCEFA and the projects you would like to see MNCEFA invest in sort of opportunity for the public. So that's generically, if you have pipeline ideas, get them out there. Specific to the LPO opportunity, the loan program office opportunity, we're going to have to deal with the fact that if the LPO throws in 80%, we need to find the other 20%. And that can come from a bank or a national developer who is putting together programs they might propose for Minnesota, or for programs they might propose across states, where private capital will be bringing in a substantial chunk of that 20% requirement. So I think we are looking for those with money to respond to this and those without money. So I think it's a broad response. Who could help invest in that 20%, and Brendan can elaborate on this, would definitely include philanthropies. It doesn't have to be, banks and private developers. It can be others who have money to contribute to the combination of MNCEFA and other funds that have to add up to 20% of the project.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the next one, and then Bill Grant, you're on deck. So after, Catherine asks, can government entities like the University of Minnesota meet their Minnesota 2030/3% load rooftop solar requirements by applying for these loans?
I believe that they can. I'm not sure. I mean, we know what the interest factor is likely to be with loan program office. And we are talking about, well over $100 million when it comes to higher education potential investments. So the volume is definitely there. I'm just not certain that under 5% is attractive enough for entities like the University of Minnesota. They may have other sources of financing that might be more attractive, but that's a kind of project that we absolutely would like to see proposed.
And maybe this is a related one, so sorry, Bill Grant, but just 1 second. So there's a question from Devin that asks, will MNCEFA only lend to projects that you aggregate up, or will you lend to standalone programs or projects above a $250,000 amount? Maybe that's some of the different questions that are coming in, is people trying to understand what MNCEFA will do as MNCEFA and what MNCEFA will aggregate up. Devin goes on to say, if so, would you consider more favorable lending terms if projects directly benefit low to moderate income households, such as affordable housing? And we do have a bunch of questions about some of those pieces, so we can come back to that. But that first one about aggregation, will you address that one, Pete or Peter?
I will. I'll do that, and then if Pete wants to back me up, that'd be great. So we are looking to fund programs that are financing smaller projects. So in theory, I threw out the example of the $1 million loan to an entity that's going to be financing air source heat pumps or some other efficiency or renewable investments. at a much smaller scale. So that it may be $5,000 investments on individual businesses, individual houses. But we would provide that $1 million to enable that organization to provide the direct loans to those individuals. We just can't fund anything less than $250,000. So we would need an application in excess of $250,000, but we will be lending to those entities that will be the ultimate retail lender. It could be existing credit unions and banks that have are able to fund up to a certain amount of a project, but then our funds might get them comfortable to be able to fund the entire amount of the project. So we could partner with that. We want to use, I guess, leverage our funds as much as possible, which will allow us to have the greatest impact. So I hope that those are examples are encouraging you to come up with ideas about lending programs, and that you will be proposing to be direct recipients from us to fund those projects. On the interest rate, the board, MnCEFA board, needs to establish, where we're going to go with interest rates. But I think that we are going to be better than market. I think that's our objective. And the other point is that although loan program office funds have this established interest rate, the EPA funds that we're expecting to receive are going to have a much lower interest rate that they're going to be charging. And so we'll have more flexibility with those funds as well. Pete?
Great. If you don't mind, I'm going to have us just hop to the next one because we've got quite a few.
Okay.
So Bill Grant, if you'll unmute, go ahead, and then I'll come to Eric, your questions next.
Thanks, Lisa. So my question is about the types of entities that you might have serve as aggregators for smaller projects. Are you imagining that there will be any restrictions on the type of entities that could serve in that capacity, or preferences that the MnCEFA board would have for the types of entities that you hope will step up and apply in that manner?
As I envision it, I would hope that this isn't the first entry point to lending that these entities are getting into, that they have some background of financing in the past, that they have underwriting guidelines that are established, and that our funds would just be coming in to enhance their funding. With that said, if there is a new organization or an organization that this is going to be their first effort in lending, I don't think that the board is going to exclude that, but it is to be determined by the MnCEFA board.
Super. Okay, Eric Mushler has two different questions. I'm going to do both of them. Is this meant to finance only the energy aspects of a project, housing in particular, or is it able to finance the whole project? So let's do that, and then I'll get to his second one, and then Tyler, I'll come to you.
I think it's only the energy aspect of a project, with a bit of a caveat, and that is if we have a facility that is producing energy components, we might be able to fully fund that facility using the loan program office fund. So an example would be $100 million manufacturing facility that is producing, component parts to buildings or housing. There is the ability to use loan program office funding for that. So that we could use Department of Energy for $80 million, MnCEFA needs to have some piece of that, and if you say $1 to $5 million is kind of what I'm envisioning. And then probably equity. We're gonna require equity from that developer. And that would be 20-year financing fixed for under 5% for a new construction facility. Sounds very advantageous.
Can I just add one thing
Yeah.
to that? So the power of the CEFI is to allow the loans to focus on deployment and not to have to focus on advancing the technologies. The DOE is likely to, if you have a $200 million factory for something in the green energy supply chain, likely to be willing to deal with you directly and not require the CEFI. So if you come to us, we may say, you have a project so big and you don't need the waiver of the innovation requirement from that pot of money. So we'll just send you to talk to LPO directly.
And that's great. And I think, I mean, Eric's coming at it. I think Eric's from Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. So he's thinking about affordable housing development, I think, and sort of, can it fund just the energy components or the rest of it? So that's all good context too. But he has another follow-up question, and you both started to talk about the equity components. And he asks, is 20% only equity or other financing? Can other financing be used to make up the 20% in some combination of grants and loans?
Yeah, it can, it's any combination. It's really dictated that Department of Energy is maxed out at 80%. And then we just need to figure out that remaining 20% could be equity, could be philanthropic. In order to access the Department of Energy funds, MnCEFA will have to have some investment in it. So we will have some money in any Department of Energy loan program office application that we're a part of.
There's a very important thing to add to there. You cannot mix federal funds with federal grant funds with federal loan funds. So you can't get the other 20% from a federal grant. You could get it from a state grant. You could get it from a grant from a philanthropy, but you can't get it from a federal grant. What you can do with either a grant or a loan is also throw in the federal tax credits. And because many of them, for many of the folks on this call, will be direct pay, they act as a federal grant. You'll still only be able to fund 80% from the LPO of the remaining after that tax credit. So you can't count it towards your 20%, but those funds will still be available to the project.
Super. Okay, Tyler, go ahead. And then we're going to tackle a series of 40% disadvantaged community questions, and then we'll come back to a few others. Tyler, go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for all your leadership on this. This is just so exciting. We're so blessed in Minnesota to have this. Tyler Vogel, Community Reinvestment Fund. I was just asking if, as part of the RFI, there's going to be some questions of more to piggyback off Ann's earlier question, programmatic elements, for instance, with partners. So I know New York Green Bank did a community decarbonization fund to help support and build out community development finance institutions as part of the program. Is that something that's welcome to include in this, as well as just broader partners? Obviously, I'm biased, including CDFIs on this piece, but just if you could touch on that. Thank you so much.
I don't know why we would not want more partners in this, and we really would look at you as partnering with us to accomplish as many projects as we can. So I don't see why we won't absolutely encourage the incorporation in these responses into multi-participants. I don't know, Brendan, you've worked with a lot of the other states, and you mentioned New York, but any other comment on that?
Only just to say, yeah, reinforce, we definitely want the partnership. As Peter mentioned before, MnCEFA is not going to be a retail lender, which CDFIs have experience doing. And so if there is existing products that maybe there's a way that a partnership can make them more attractive to consumers, or we can partner on just the marketing and the education about those products, that would be useful. And we should just, very soon in the next year, we'll be hearing from EPA about their other award. There's two big buckets coming through from EPA. One is sort of targeted more towards state level green banks, and one is really focused on helping CDFI community prepare to land in this green space. And so we would love to sort of think about, as those funds start to flow, how does that partnership work? And if CDFIs have new products that they are developing with those funds, like, are there ways that we can leverage the capitalization of the green bank to deploy money through those new products that CDFIs are developing with those EPA funds? So that's a little convoluted, but just to say, I think the partnership piece is definitely welcome, and we'll have much more to talk about together in 2024 as some of these things get clearer on how the funds are flowing from the federal government.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to combine a couple from Michael Kraus and Billy Weber. So Michael asks, what criteria will drive the 40% low income disadvantaged benefit goal? Is it things like percentage of AMI, location, or development entity? And then Billy tags on to say, and will you define direct benefit to community? What are we thinking about direct benefit?
I think we're going to use definitions that are used by the state of Minnesota and the federal agencies as far as defining Justice 40 communities. And it's usually racial, income, language barriers, those guidelines that are going to define that. The other area is if it's contaminated area, or if it's a closed power plant, those kinds of things that are going to allow for a Justice 40 investment. As far as judging that, we need to absolutely assure that those benefits are directly derived by the residents of those communities. So if we're funding a solar garden, we need to know that economic benefit is going into and benefiting the individuals within those communities.
Super. Okay, going back to one from Chris Dufferin. Can you talk about the compliance requirements for the DOE Loan Programs Office and MNCEFA funding, for instance, around prevailing wage requirements? And would these requirements apply to projects that do smaller loans, say individual loans to customers that are under $30,000?
So if MNCEFA is financing the project, then in theory, prevailing wage is, and it's under $100,000. The statute says that prevailing wage does not need to be reported or paid. Generally, if Department of Energy is involved, we're going to assume that it is going to be required, that prevailing wage is going to be required, whether it's, if we've got $30,000 projects, those are going to be required to pay and report prevailing wage. So I think the distinction is if it's federal funds, just anticipate that prevailing wage is going to be required. If it's MNCEFA funds, we have some flexibility. Absolutely want to have the individuals that are participating in the clean economy and installing these to be paid adequately. So we are going to definitely encourage prevailing wage, understanding that the reporting aspect of it might be cumbersome. and add additional costs, but we are going to encourage prevailing wage to whatever extent we can.
Super.
I'm going
Jen
to jump
Fuller,
in
you
on,
sh-
I'm going to jump
Oh,
in
yeah.
on that. So just to reemphasize, absolutely required if DOE funding is going to be involved, no matter what the project size is. And we have had direct conversations with DLI, also in those conversations, and DOE about how we can make this work smoothly for all projects. It's a work in progress.
Okay, can we have 8 minutes and a few more questions? So Jen, go ahead and ask, and then I'm going to try to hit the rest of them before we wrap up.
So much. So I just have a question about qualifying projects. There's 2 lines in the establishment bill for MNCEFA that talk about water. So one of them says, a qualifying project could reduce water use or protect, restore, or preserve the quality of surface waters. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. You know, when I was running the PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy, we had legislation passed last year that allowed for PACE to fund agricultural land enhancements that reduce the environmental impact of the agricultural industry. So to the extent that we have investments that are going to improve water quality, then those would be eligible investments by MNCEFA.
Super. A related question about sort of what is eligible. Matt Paradise asks, would installer energy monitoring equipment qualify for the lending program because it's designed to create visibility to react to more efficient choices?
I think if it's in addition to some efficiency or renewable project, I think that it would be eligible. But on its own, we're probably not financing the monitoring. I think one of the earlier questions was, well, what it is required, and really some reduction in greenhouse gas, and just monitoring is not going to qualify for that. But if that is part of the bigger project, those component parts, so those additional costs would be eligible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super. And Jeremy Kalin notes that the clean water language in the MNCEFA statute mirrors the Clean Water Legacy Act statute, just flagging. Okay. Let me go to, I see yours, Kevin. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to go to Rolf's first. I think you mentioned earlier that the multi-state initiatives are welcome to achieve scale and impact as long as Minnesota gets its share. But would MNCEFA be able to warehouse federally awarded money for a multi-state effort devoted to, say, industrial decarb in the participating states?
I think that'll be a negotiation with all the states, but absolutely, I think MNCEFA would be able to be a lead in that application and to be able to warehouse.
Okay.
I think warehouse is actually a term in the statute.
Do you want to
So-
define what that means, Peter Klein, in case people are thinking of a building?
I think it's really the accumulation of those funds and then the distribution of the funds and trying to revolve them as quickly as possible. So obtaining the funds from the federal government, distributing those to the various state partners that we enter into agreements with, but then also revolving that back through to the federal government or to additional projects within each of the states.
Mm-hmm. Super. So Kevin McDonald asks, how common is it for public entities such as counties, cities, even independent school districts or state agencies to enter into multi-year loan agreements to secure capital for needed or desired projects? How does this, or could this, sync with the public sector approach of exercising their bonding capabilities?
How does it interfere with that?
How could it sync with or
Oh,
interact
sync with, yeah, coordinate with. You know, that there's, in my experience with annual appropriation lease work with public buildings, there just always seems to be some hang up with bonding. In order to do bonding, the project really needs to be in excess of $5 million. And so if we're talking about a few $100,000 investment here and there, the bonding doesn't really work. Annual appropriation lease might work, but there are concerns with that from the various public entities. But I do think that we will be able to sync with perhaps the annual appropriation lease method and lenders to help a lot of these projects get accomplished. I mean, I worked on hundreds of public sector projects, and it just always seems like there was some gap there that needed to get filled, and we're absolutely looking at MnCEFA to be that gap filler.
Wonderful. There are a couple of other ideas, some things around refrigerants, other links to other information, but I don't see any other questions. Anything you all want to add to close us out? We've got about 1 minute.
Appreciate everybody. It was a good, well-attended, great questions. Be creative. I mean, bring it on and let us be creative in helping with you, helping get your ideas to fruition, and let's get a lot of projects accomplished. It's a great group that is on this call, got a lot of great ideas. Bring them on and let's try to figure out how the heck we can accomplish Minnesota's great environmental goals. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everyone. Bye now.